Hey, this is Adam Torres, and I'm here to tell you that it has never been easier to start your very own podcast. At Mission Matters, our goal is to amplify stories that matter. That means we want to help you start your podcast because your story matters. We can do this in 3 different ways. 1, join our podcast school and take a free or paid course. 2, visit our resources page where we've already figured out what you need, such as where to host your podcast. Or 3, heck, we can even do everything for you through our podcast agency, including editing for cheaper than you can do in-house. Oh, and no contract, service is month to month. Get started by heading over to missionmatters.com and click on Start a Podcast. All right, now let's get into the show.
Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres to keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, today I have Jessica Graham on the line, and she's president over at JG Global Advisory. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Jessica, so I'm excited to get into today's topic. We're going to talk about female anti-poaching units in Africa and some of your work and research that you've been doing. And also, I know you got a lot of projects going on, so we're going to talk about a couple of things. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about what you're doing over at JG Global Advisory overall. Tell us a little bit more about the firm, please.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I seamlessly navigate Washington bureaucracy as a former senior official for the U.S. government and really translating impact into funding opportunities for my clients through applying a rigor of a strategic business development approach. And I work with mostly conservation organizations. And, it's a very crowded, competitive space with few donors internationally. And my work, it takes me international. And so with that regard, really taking that business acumen and applying it to the nonprofit sector, as I've seen over the years, I was a former large U.S. government donor to the issue of conservation projects and environmental security topics across the globe. And so really saw that as a gap. So when I came to launch JG Global Advisory, that was a gap I thought we needed to desperately fill for that community. I also serve as kind of an integrator, if you will, of systems and technology and for projects that can be leveraged in the conservation or environmental security arena for a more holistic approach.
Let's talk about some of the projects that you've been working on lately. So I know you just had a webinar. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so USAID has a consortium through one of their opportunities that has several U.S. non-governmental organizations such as Traffic WWF and George Mason University's TRACK program. And so I had done research, conducted interviews on all female ranger units and their anti-poaching strategies to stem corruption in Africa. There are 3 all-female anti-poaching units in Africa, one in Zimbabwe, one in Kenya, and one in South Africa. And when I had spoken to the leaders of the who had created those several years ago, I kept asking them a question that I was receiving all the time as a former government official, which was, what's the silver bullet for stemming corruption involved in the illegal wildlife trade? Because it's oftentimes a facilitator or an enabler to the crime, corruption. And my response was really surprising because across the board, not just there, but my senior official colleagues in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and elsewhere had stated to me, women are incorruptible. There's been 0 incidences of corruption among and within our units. And we're reducing poaching activities. We're seeing increase in wildlife activity and enhanced overall security because women are so great at they serve as the backbone for information gathering on the ground for intelligence and crime prevention. So that piqued my curiosity to really then look a little bit deeper at the issue and take a more aggressive research and writing approach to it. And so, there was over 200 women involved in this research study of these 0 incidents of corruption. And there's not many. There's 2 other ones in Asia that I don't discuss in detail in this webinar. But really, there is no, the finding or the outcome of that was really there is no perfect blueprint model that will fit everywhere. But looking at what did work and how this has impacted generations who youth look up to these female rangers and really want to be a ranger versus a poacher, which they will be receiving that as an option as they get older and have, need for sustainable livelihood. And so going in the right path in the right direction is really an incredible story, and one that has garnered media attention, quite frankly, in particular the Africa units.
That really is an amazing story, number one. But number two, I don't want to assume that everybody listening to this kind of knows of the overall just poaching problem in general. Can you touch on that for a bit? We're going to circle back, by the way, to the all-female anti-poaching units, because I think it's an amazing story. But I do want to set the stage a little bit by maybe talking a little bit more about the poaching problem in general.
Yeah, so wildlife trafficking is one of the most, if not the fourth largest lucrative crime of transnational organized crime globally. And the U.S. is one of the largest demand markets alongside other countries like China for very different products. We have high demand market in the U.S. for mostly reptiles and exotic birds coming in from Latin America. And so rhinos are getting poached at unprecedented levels to the point that they will be extinct in less than a decade if we don't do something for both rhinos, elephants, and other kind of megafauna. But these animals are in serious jeopardy for survival, and humans are the number one threat to their existence. And the rhino horn in the black market will go for more than gold or cocaine. And so it's a high risk. It's a low risk for getting caught, and it's a high reward potential. So that equation needs to be flipped in order for criminals to stop dabbling in this. I mean, the same criminals that we're seeing who are moving drugs internationally and small arms trafficking are also trafficking in illegal wildlife products. So it's a huge issue that many people aren't aware how lucrative and how extensive it permeates across the global criminal system.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that even, and I'm obviously for the animals. I shouldn't say obviously, but I'm for the animals, and I understand all that. And sometimes people, they're like, maybe if they're not specifically really animal-centric, they don't understand that type of illegal money funds a lot of the other things that you wouldn't want to see. So large organizations, human trafficking, and, all these other type of things, the drug, that, like, they're all the same people. And so this is, I shouldn't say in every case, right? But let's just say some of the elements that are attracted to one thing, they're going to also be like doing some of this stuff. So you're like, it's a big problem, like all of that illegal money entering the system and some of the things that it's funding overall. Yeah,
definitely. I actually briefed Prince Charles in the UK several years ago. He and his sons have all been very engaged on the issue of combating the illegal wildlife trade, and have actually engaged the heads of major banks internationally, the financial institutions, to raise this issue of identifying the money laundering that's going on and really elevate the illegal wildlife trade on their radar screen, along with narco trafficking and others that their purview is placed well at, to really put this center in front and center on their radar screen.
No, well said. So Jessica, if somebody is listening to this and they want to follow, because I know you're doing a lot of writing, a lot of research on the female anti-poaching units in Africa. If somebody's listening to this and they want to get involved, they want to follow your work, I mean, what's the best way for them to connect with you and your team?
Yeah, the best way to link to me is through my, our company website. It's jgglobaladvisory.com. And that will link them to, an email that they can get in touch with me. Also, the webinars are posted regularly. My podcast webinars presentations are posted on LinkedIn, so they can find me through Jessica Graham as well.
Oh, and don't forget the name of the podcast. So we've got to leave that name of that podcast. I want people to check that out too. So for everybody that's listening to this show for a long time, I love supporting other podcasts. So what's the name of the podcast?
I've done several podcasts, interviews. So there's the Sustainability Matters is another green podcast I've done. And then the webinar is specific to targeting natural resource corruption. So it's called the TNRC project. And they have
Perfect.
a website as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Jessica, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about your background and all the great stuff that you're doing over at JG Global Advisory. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review in the Apple iTunes Store. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, definitely give us a subscribe there, but also leave us some comments in the video. Love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. And Jessica, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.